Today we're taking a quick look at the settings that I'm using to get the most out of the LUMIX S9. In case you missed it, recently I did a video talking about what I think about the LUMIX S9 after 6 months of using the camera, and if you're interested in watching that video, I'll leave it linked in the description below. But I wanted to follow up that video with talking about some of the settings that I'm using to get the most out of this camera. And so to not make this video super long, let's go ahead and dive right in talking about my settings for the LUMIX S9. And I'm gonna go ahead and start off by saying I'm going to immediately turn off the record limit. This is something that came with a recent firmware update and is just an amazing feature of the S9 now. I really do think that this is a videography and filmmaking powerhouse in such a little camera because of taking off that record limit. So that's the first thing that I'm doing. The next thing I'm doing is I am changing my exposure mode to manual. This gives me full manual control over the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. The next thing is I am changing shutter speed to shutter angle. This just allows for me to go between high frame rates easily without also having to change my shutter speed, and it creates a little bit more accurate depiction of motion blur using shutter angle rather than shutter speed. I will mention that my color profile that I'm primarily using is Vlog, and also I am using the real-time LUT feature on the S9. Now my LUT of choice a lot of times is the dark night LUT from LUMIX, and that is found in the LUMIX Lab app. Now for ISO, I am going to be anywhere between 640 and 4000 ISO because I'm mostly filming in Vlog, and those are the two native ISO levels for Vlog. And I do have this assigned to my up button on the rear wheel so that I can easily go between the low and high frequency. This has been such a game changer because you can set the low and high frequency value. And so when you are in the low frequency, you can actually set that to 640. And when you're in the high frequency, you can set that to 4000. And that way you can easily toggle between them. And so that is what I'm doing with that up button. Now, next, let's talk about recording modes, which with the S9, you do have the MP4 Lite. And I use that every once in a while for Instagram Reels or something that I'm just don't care about file size or the robustness of the file. But for the most part, I am using MOV and 6K OpenGate at 24 frames per second. Next, let's talk about autofocus settings. One, I do have my autofocus on mode 2, which basically has autofocus working at all times. And so it doesn't just start working when I start recording. And then the other thing I'm really doing is changing my focus modes. I'll go between one area and then full area depending on what I'm filming. In this scenario, I'm doing full area with human detection. And if I'm in a crowded room, I may do one area with human detection or just one area depending on how crowded it is or what I'm filming. And so those are the modes I'm primarily switching between. Now I do have my focus modes assigned to the right button on the rear wheel, and that just allows me to easily toggle between those focus modes, again, depending on what I'm filming. Now, talking about focusing, I do have focus magnification assigned to my exposure compensation button. I don't ever use this button, so I've reassigned it to focus magnification. Now, keeping along the lines with focusing, I do also have focus peaking assigned to the left button on the rear wheel, and that just allows me to toggle on or off focus peaking. Now, let's take a couple seconds and talk about composition settings. With composition settings, I am turning on my grid lines, which allows me to utilize the rule of thirds really easily, and I am using frame markers. The S9 does have the ability to use up to 3 frame markers, and a lot of times I'll just have 1 because I don't like the screen to be that busy, but the frequent aspect ratios that I utilize are 9:16, 16:9, and a 2:1 aspect ratio. And so depending on what I'm filming, I'll change those to be my frame markers, or if I am filming all 3 at once, I will use the 3 frame marker option that's available for the S9. Now moving on, let's talk about some LUT options that I use. One is I am loading this camera up with all of my frequently used LUTs. And with that, I am going to turn on log view assist for when I am using Vlog and want to preview what my LUT is going to look like in post. So the next thing I want to mention is a quick kind of rapid fire round of the leftover buttons that I haven't mentioned already and what they're assigned to. And so let's just run through these real quick. One is going to be the down button on the rear wheel. That is going to go to my frame markers to allow me to toggle them on and off. The return button is going to be my level. Just again, I like to toggle it on and off to keep things off the screen if I can, but that's where that's assigned. Now on my quick menu, I don't dive in here a ton, but I do have my white balance, my incremental ISO levels, and then also my record quality if I ever want to change that. So that's a run through of my settings for the LUMIX S9, again, to get the most out of this camera. But the most important setting I'm ever going to tell you to turn on to your LUMIX camera is red record frame indicator. It is one that I live and die by. If I forget that I'm filming something, I know, because I literally can look at my screen right now and see the big red indicator. That is going to tell me that I'm recording. If I can leave you with anything and encourage you to turn on anything, even above like manual exposure, turn on your red record frame indicator. It's one of my favorite features of my LUMIX cameras, and so definitely turn that on. You'll thank yourself later. And so that's a quick look at my LUMIX S9 settings. If you do have any questions about these settings or anything we talked about in this video, let me know in the comments below or reach out to me on Instagram and we can start a conversation there. As always, thank you for joining. Go and find your journey. Go embrace life. Peace. Go return on red record frame indicator. Do it now.